we're doing tonight is an adaptation of a book that I read in 1958 by Morris West about a town in Calabria, and a devil's advocate is someone who was appointed by the Vatican to inspect whether or not someone is a saint. And the devil's advocate is to try to prove he's not. This is set in 1944, so that was right before Rome fell in World War II. So that gives you where we're at. Now, we're going to try to do what we always did. We're not in the theater around, so we feel a little homeless, but we can't dim any lights. But if I now that I've persuaded most of you against your will to come to the front, the actors will feel more comfortable. And at the end, the drill is I drafted Dermot, my friend Dermot Quinn, Dr. Quinn from the history department, to talk about it after for 20 or so minutes, and then we can have a chat about this book. It sold, as I say, 2 million copies in 1958 and 59. And to have, I tried to get it out of the Morris County library system. They had 1 copy. And I think it's a very good book, and it should be on the reading list. I hope you like it as much as I do. I want to thank the 2 Glorias who have done so much to advertise this for me, from the Chesterton Review and the Catholic Studies Department, and Inez, who is the chairperson of that, has been kind enough to join us tonight, but she has enough to do. So thank you very much, and hope you enjoy the reading.
Sorry, Doc. It's in your bag? Yeah. Thank you.
To prepare other men for death. It shocked him to be so unready for his own. He was a reasonable man, and reason told him that a man's death sentence is written on his palm the day he is born. He was a cold man, little troubled by passion, irked not at all by discipline. Yet his first impulse had been a wild clinging to the illusion of immortality. Blaise Meredith was regretting it now, as in the midst of all this life, he alone, it seemed, had been marked to die.
Carcinoma.
Is it operable?
I can operate, yes. If I do, you'll be dead in 3 months.
If you don't,
you'll live a little longer and die a little more painfully.
How much longer?
6 months, 12 at the outside.
It's a grim choice.
You must make it yourself.
I understand that. I'll think about what you've told me. In case I should decide not to have an operation, go back to work, would you be good enough to write me a report to my local doctor? full prognosis, a prescription, perhaps?
With pleasure, Monsignor Meredith. You work in Rome, I believe. Unfortunately, I don't write Italian. I admire your courage, Monsignor. I don't subscribe to the Roman faith, or to any faith for that matter, but I imagine you find it a great consolation at a time like this.
I hope I may, Doctor. But I've been a priest too long to expect it.
2 days later, Eugenio Cardinal Murata sat in his study chair behind the great buhl desk and talked with Monsignor Blaise Meredith.
There it is, Eminence. I have at best 12 months. Half of that, perhaps, for active work.
I grieve for you, my friend. It comes to all of us, of course, but it's always a shock.
Yet we of all people should be prepared for it.
No, we mustn't overrate ourselves. We're men like all others. We are priests by choice and calling. The powers we exercise, the grace we dispense, are independent of our own worthiness. It's better for us to be saints than sinners, but like our brothers outside the ministry, we're generally something in between.
I am very empty. There is no evil that I repent, and no good that I count. I cannot even show the scars.
I can release you now if you wish. I can provide you with a pension from the funds of the congregation.
It's a great kindness, Eminence, but I have no talent for contemplation. I should prefer to go on working. In all this, I assume that your Eminence wants to use me. I'm afraid I can't guarantee the best of service.
You've always done better than you know, my friend. You've always given me more than you promised. Besides, there is a matter which you can help me greatly, and perhaps help yourself too. I have here a petition of the Bishop of Valenta, and he's in need of a devil's advocate in the cause of Giacomo Nerone. What do you think of it? Giacomo Nerone was murdered by the communist partisans in the last year of the war. Miracles have been claimed. And apparently, a spontaneous cult has sprung up among the people. Both must be judicially investigated. The first stage of the investigation has been made, and the verdict towards approval. The next stage is automatic. Introduction of the cause for beatification to the bishop's court.
I am a sick man, Eminence. I could not do you justice.
You must let me be the judge of that. Besides, as I said, I believe it may help you too.
I don't understand.
What I have to say to you, Monsignor, is probably a presumption. I'm not your confessor. I cannot look into your conscience, but I believe that you have reached a crisis. There's no passion in your life, my son. You've withdrawn yourself too long, and you're a stranger in the human family. You never know the dignity of need nor gratitude for a suffering shared. This is your sickness. This is the cross you have fashioned for your own shoulders. This is where your doubts begin and your fears too, because a man who cannot love his fellows cannot love God either.
How does one begin to love?
From need, from the need of the flesh, and the need of the spirit. A man hungers for his first kiss, and his first real prayer is made when he hungers for the lost parent.
I am so very tired.
Go home, rest. In the morning, you can meet for collaborating. Present your credentials to the Bishop of Valenta and begin work.
You're a hard man, Eminence.
Men die every day, but the work of the church continues. Go, my son, in peace and in the name of God.
At 11 o'clock the following morning, Blaise Meredith left Rome for Calabria. The guard blew his whistle and Meredith climbed aboard the train, prepared to sweat out the long, humid voyage. Naples, Nocera, Salerno, Eboli, Cassano, Cosenza, and in the late evening, Valenta, where the bishop was waiting to welcome him. Aurelio, Bishop of Valenta, was a surprise in more ways than one. He was a tall, spare man, still in his vigorous 40s.
You are surprised, Monsignor?
Pleasantly. I expected something quite different.
Bourbon Baroque.
velvet and brocade and gilt cherubs with the paint peeling off their backsides.
Something like that, yes?
You'll find more than enough of it here in the South. Old men following old ways because old ways are safer. They see poverty and ignorance as crosses to be borne and not injustices to be remedied. They believe that the more priests and monks and nuns there are, the better for the world. I'd like to see fewer and better ones. I prefer to have fewer churches and more people going to them.
Fewer saints, too?
Thank God for the English. You wonder why a man like me should take up the cause of Giacomo Nerone?
Frankly, yes.
Until you came, my dear Meredith, I was beginning to feel I'd made a mistake in appealing to Rome for assistance. It involved a concession, you see, a certain sacrifice of my autonomy.
Then why did you write to Cardinal Morano? Why did you ask for a Roman priest as a postulator and promoter of faith?
There are two reasons why I'm interested in the case. But to begin with, it's an unauthorized cultus. The second isn't so simple, and the officials wouldn't understand it.
Morano might. I might too.
Why should you two be different?
Because Morano's a wise old humanist. And because I'm due to die of carcinoma in 12 months.
I've been wondering about you. Now I begin to understand. Very well, I'll try to explain. A man in the shadow of death should be beyond scandal, even from a bishop. I believe that the church in this country is in need of reform. I think we have too many saints and not enough sanctity. Too many cults and not enough catechism. Too many medals and not enough medicine. Too many churches and not enough schools. Our clergy are undereducated and insecure, and yet we rail against anti-clericals and communists. We clergy are more jealous of our rights under the Concordat than the rights of our people under the natural and divine law. Do I shock you, Monsignor?
You encourage me. But why do you want a new saint?
I don't. I hope with all my heart it fails.
Then why did you ask His Eminence for help?
That's the principle in Rome, my dear Meredith. You always get the opposite of what you ask for.
But if the case is proved, if Giacomo Nerone is really a saint and a wonder worker,
I'll wait for the facts. When would you like to begin work?
immediately. I'm living on borrowed time.
As the afternoon wore on and the first chill of evening filtered into the room, Blaise Meredith began slowly to understand the task that lay ahead.
Let me try to put this into perspective for you. Here are two villages perched on the horns of the same mountain. Before the war, what were they? Typical Calabrian hamlets. Small, depressed places inhabited by tenant farmers of absentee landowners. In their standard of living, there was no perceptible difference between them, except that in Gemello Minore, there was a resident padrona, the Contessa de Sanctis. An interesting woman, the Contessa. I'll be interested what you think of her. However, her presence then as now made no difference to the state of the local population. But then came the war. The young men were taken for the army, the old ones and the women were left to farm the land. It was poor land at best. There was a state levy on crops, and by the time the landlords had taken their share, there was little enough left for the peasants. Now, into this situation comes a man, a stranger, who calls himself Giacomo Nerone. What do we know about him?
Little enough. He arrives from nowhere dressed in rags. He's wounded, sick with malaria. He claims to be a deserter from the fighting in the south. The villagers accept him at face value. They have sons of their own who are far away. They have no sympathy for a lost cause. A young widow named Nina Sanduzzi takes him into her house and cares for him. He enters into a liaison with her, which is later broken off, right in the middle of her pregnancy.
And then?
Then I find myself at a loss. The record is unclear. There is talk of a turning to God. He leaves Nina Sanduzzi, builds a small hut, plants a garden, and spends hours in solitude and contemplation. He appears in a church on Sundays and takes the sacraments. At the same time, he appears to have taken over the leadership of the villages.
How does he lead them? I know it by heart, but I'm still puzzled by it.
As I read it, the evidence suggests he helps an old man whose land was getting away from him, a grandmother feeble and alone, a sick farmer who wanted someone to hoe his potato patch. Those who could afford it paid in kind. Goat milk, olives, wine, cheese. He passed it on to those in need. When the winter came, he organized a pooling of labor and resources and enforced it rigorously, sometimes violently.
Well, we'll mark that to the credit of Giacomo. The next thing in his favor is some kind of medical service with a certain doctor, Aldo Maya. A political exile who, curiously enough, refuses to give any testimony in the case. This is more interesting because before and after the war, Meyer tried to organize the peasants and failed completely. He's a man of singular humanity, but a Jew in a Catholic country. You should try to get close to him. Now, go on, please.
Next, we find evidence of religious activity. He prays with the sick, comforts the dying, and here's the odd thing. 2 witnesses say when Father Anselmo refused to come. What does that mean?
There's been much scandal about this man. He's an old man, and I think very near to despair. I should hate to think I was the one who drove him into it.
I'm sorry, but you have a reputation for rigid discipline.
Not at all. We're friends. You have a right to ask. But go on, read me more of Giacomo Nerone.
March 1944, the Germans came, fighting the British army up the toe of Calabria. Nerone negotiates with them. The peasants supply them with minimum fresh food for medicines and winter clothing. They also promise to protect the women, and the bargain is kept reasonably well. It was this negotiation that was later alleged as a reason for his execution by the partisans. When the Allies began to push towards Naples, they bypassed the villages and left the local partisans to deal with the retreating German forces. Giacomo Nerone stayed on. Why?
It's in the record.
What did he try to do? That's what interests me. Why did some folk cling to him as a holy one, and others reject him and betray him to the executioners? Why were the partisans against him in the first place?
They called him a collaborator. They accused him of profitable commerce with the Germans.
They're not concerned with politics, but with sanctity, the direct relationship of a man with the God who made him.
Perhaps that's all it was. A good man caught up in politics.
Does your lordship believe that?
Does it matter what I believe, Monsignor?
Does it matter? I think it matters very much.
Why, Monsignor?
Because I think that you, like me, are afraid of the finger of God.
I told you I do not want a saint. But what if God wants me? Now you come afraid of the finger of God. I find in you a brother whom I have come to trust with my heart. Both of us at this moment are looking for a sign, a light in the darkness that besets us.
I lie awake at night. I feel the life slipping out of me. When the pain comes, I cry out. But there is no prayer in it, only fear.
I pray for both of us. And out of prayer, I have come to a decision. We should ask for a sign.
What sign?
We should make this prayer, both of us. If it is your will, O God, to show the virtue of your servant Giacomo Nerone, show it in the body of Blaise Meredith. Restore him to health and hold him longer from the hands of death through Jesus Christ our Lord.
No, I could not do it.
Not for yourself, then for me.
Oh, I'm sorry, but I can't do it.
Now, I think you should go to bed. Tomorrow will be a long day and possibly a troubling one for you.
Will your lordship bless me with the journey?
Benedicat te omnipotens Deus. May God bless you, my son, and keep you from the noonday devil and from the terror of the long night. In the name of the Father, of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost.
Amen.
But the blessing had no virtue against the pain which took him that night, a wretched agony that drained him of all strength. When he left in the morning, he looked like a man riding to his own funeral. From Valenta to Janella Minore, the survey distance is 60 kilometers. But the road is so winding, the surface so poor and rutted, the climb so steep, that it takes a full 2 hours by car. By the time the car had reached the piazza, the whole village had turned out. As for Blaise Meredith, he saw them all, yet he saw none of them. He was glad when the car pulled out of the village and roared up the last steep incline to the villa, where the porter stood at the great iron gates to let him in, and the Contessa was waiting to greet him.
My dear Monsignor Meredith, so nice to see you.
My dear Contessa, thank you for having me here.
Did you have a good journey?
Fair enough. I'm not a good traveler these days, but I am here in one piece.
Poor man, you must be quite exhausted. I'll help Pietro show you to your room. You can wash and rest until dinner.
I'd like that.
When Meredith came down to dinner that night, he found the Contessa and her guests already assembled, taking drinks in the salon. The contrast between them was startling. The Contessa was groomed as if for a Roman evening. Meyer was dressed in a shabby black dinner jacket. Meredith was drawn to him immediately, and his greeting was less reserved than usual.
I'm happy to meet my medical advisor. I'm going to be in good hands.
A better reserved judgment, Monsignor. I have a bad reputation.
And there they left it, while the Contessa drew Father Anselmo out of his corner and presented him to his Roman colleague.
Glad to see you, Monsignor. We don't get many Romans down this way. Too far and too rough for 'em, I suppose. That's the trouble we have in this part of the world. The Vatican doesn't even know what's going on. They've got more money than you could poke a stick at, but we'll never get a smell of it. I remember when I was in Rome.
His lordship sends you his greeting and hopes that I won't be too much trouble to you.
His lordship sends greetings. Nice of him. He'd like to get rid of me. He can't do it without a court case. That's the way it is. We might as well understand each other.
About young Paolo, doctor, is he coming to work for me?
I believe so. His mother said she would come to see you tomorrow.
I'm glad. This will probably interest you, Monsignor. Young Paolo is the son of Giacomo Caroni. He was baptized with his mother's name. He's rather wild, but we, that is Dr. Meyer and I, thought it would do him good to begin work.
That seems a kind thought. How does his mother live?
She works for me.
She used to be a very pretty woman. She's thickened up now, of course. I remember her when she made her first communion. Lovely child.
You knew Giacomo Nerone, I believe, Doctor?
Yes, I knew him. I was the first person who saw him after Nina Sanduzzi. She called me in to pick a bullet out of his shoulder.
You're probably aware, Doctor, that in a cause for beatification, even the evidence of non-Catholics is admitted. I'd like to talk to you about that at your convenience.
Any time, Monsignor?
Father Anselmo can probably help you a good deal too, Monsignor. You knew Neroni too, didn't you, Father?
Never thought much of the man. He interfered too much. Anyone would have thought he was a priest himself. Used to come battering on my door as soon as anyone had a bellyache. Wanted me to come racing out with the sacraments. But one night he nearly had me shot by the Germans. After that, I would not go out after curfew.
The first evidence seemed to indicate that Giacomo Nerone acted as a mediator between the peasants and the occupying troops. What do you think of that, Contessa?
I think that's probably an exaggeration. Most of the mediation was done by myself, on a very official basis, of course. I think that Nerone exaggerated his influence to build up his credit with the people.
Has anyone ever established definitely who this man was?
It's never been clearly established where he came from. How do you establish the fact, Monsignor?
We rely on the sworn testimony of those who knew him.
So will you, Romans. You don't see the simplest thing. Even when they stick up under your noses, everyone's talking as though they knew nothing. We all knew who he was. I knew, the doctor knew.
He's drunk. I'm sorry, Monsignor, but he should be got home immediately.
He's old. I'll get him home.
Pietro can go with you.
He's a brother priest. I'll get him home with a doctor.
As they walked down the rough road towards the village, Father Anselmo hanging from their shoulders, Meredith was astonished to feel how light he was. Meredith, who had rarely come near a drunk, and had never seen a drunken priest, was at first disgusted, and then touched with a sharp compassion. Who could love this shambling wreck? Whether his soul was damned for eternity, if indeed his soul was left after the long wasting of the years.
Well, can't you let a body sleep?
He's drunk. You'd better get him to bed, Rosa.
I knew this would happen. Come on, crazy one. Rosa will get you to bed and look after you.
Come on, Monsignor. We'd better carry him to bed. The woman's almost as old as he is.
Leave him. You've done enough damage tonight. I can look after him. I've been doing it long enough.
At the moment's hesitation, Meyer shrugged and walked out of the room. Meredith followed him out into the grateful freshness of the moonlight.
Are you shocked, Monsignor?
I'm sorry for him. Deeply sorry.
Well, the church is to blame for half of it, my friend. They send him out to a place like this with half an education and no stipend and expect him to stay celibate. He's just a peasant, and not a very intelligent one at that. He's lucky to have found a woman like Rosa Benzoni to bully him and keep his socks clean.
I know. That's what touched me most of all. She was like a wife to him. She loves him.
Does that surprise you, Monsignor?
It shames me. I have spent all my life in the priesthood, and I think I've wasted it.
That makes two of us. Come down to my place, and I'll make you a cup of coffee.
Blaze Meredith was stirring early on this fine spring morning. He had slept less restlessly than usual, and he decided to get up and begin work. He bent over his breviary, his lips moving in the familiar strophes of the poet king. Then when he had finished, he closed the book, thrust it into the pocket of his cassock, and walked out of the villa to talk to Father Anselmo. Old Rosa Benzoni met him at the door and led him into the house, where they found the bleary-eyed priest. His greeting was less than cordial.
Hello! What do you want?
It's about Giacomo Neroni. I noticed that you refused to give any evidence about him. Is that because you were his confessor?
No. I didn't like the long-nosed humbugs they sent around. Besides, who the hell cares what I say? I'm a scandal of the diocese.
I'm not interested in scandals.
Well, you're the first one I met who isn't, then. I had a letter from the bishop hoping my association with Rosa had lost its carnal character. How long do you think a man keeps going at that sort of thing? At my age, the best you can hope for is to keep a warm night.
Well, at our age, most married couples sleep in separate beds.
Yeah, in Rome, maybe. But down here, we haven't enough money to buy a new bed, let alone 2 sets of blankets. Look, I can't toss Rosa out into the street. She's an old woman. She's been good to me. Does his lordship have an answer to that?
I'll tell you something. I'll pay for the blankets and the bed. I'll give you and Rosa enough to set yourselves up with some new clothes, and I'll put 100,000 lire in the Banco di Calabria for you.
Why should you care so much, Monsignor?
I'm due to die in 3 months. I can't take it with me.
What else will I have to do?
Nothing. You want me to confess you? I'll do it gladly. You can't tell me much I don't already know. You've got to set your conscience in order sometime.
And when do we see the color of your money, Monsignor?
That's the beginning of it. You can buy the blankets and the bed. The rest I'll have fixed in Valenta. Will that do?
You'll have to.
Just as you say. I'll call and see you in a few days.
He got up and walked to the door. There was no farewell. As he walked down the hill towards the doctor's cottage, he had the uncomfortable feeling that he had made a fool of himself. Meyer greeted him good-humoredly and led him into the garden.
You look better this morning, Doctor.
And what now, Monsignor?
I'd like to talk with you, Doctor.
About Nerone.
Yes.
Isn't it usual to put on a stole when you hear confessions?
I'll take my shoes off instead.
Well, it's a long story, Monsignor. When it gets dry, you help yourself to a drink. It was in the nighttime, late, that Nina came to me. I was startled and angry. Nina, what the devil are you doing here?
There's a man in my house. He's a deserter and wounded. There's a bullet hole in his shoulder all red and swollen. Will you come and see him, please? I've brought money.
Keep it for God's sake. Does anyone know he's there?
No one. He came last night. I gave him breakfast and he stayed inside all day. When I got back from work, he was like this.
All right, I'll come. I found him delirious on the big brass bed. He was pulpy and swollen, and a slow yellow suppuration had already begun. Get the fire going. Boil me a pot of hot water. Then you'll have to hold him down for me.
It's a long time since I've had a man in my arms, Vittoria. It'll be a pleasure.
When it was all over, and the worst of the pain was finished, we tucked him into the bed and sat down to drink wine and break bread together. You can't keep him here. If anyone finds out, you're as good as dead.
You want me to throw out a sick man like that?
Afterwards, when he's better.
Let's wait for afterwards then.
I daren't come here in the daytime, but I'll come again at night after the village has settled down.
You're a good one. In a place full of pigs, you stand up like a man. Now go to Tornio. I'm not used to men around the place.
At first, he refused to tell me anything but the story he had first told to Nina.
Better you don't know any more than that. If you're questioned, you can answer truthfully. I'm Giacomo Nerone, a runner from Reggio. I'm trying to get back to Rome to my family. When do you think I'll be strong enough to travel?
A fortnight, 3 weeks, maybe. But where do you aim to go? Your accent doesn't belong to Calabria. Sooner or later, someone's going to ask questions. And then, how do you eat?
What else do you expect? I can't stay here.
Why not? There's a house and a bed and food. It's not much, but it's better than dying in a ditch with another bullet in you.
She could be right. Besides, when things change here, you might be in a position to help.
Not in the way you think, Doctor.
Listen, I heard you talking in your sleep. You have other loyalties, it seems. These might be useful to us later.
What do you mean, other loyalties?
I'm English. Now it said forget it.
English.
Forget it.
It's forgotten. If you stay here, there's no reason why you can't work for a living. I could get you a job with Enzo Gazzoli. He's lost 2 sons in the war and he hates the fascisti. When you're better, I'll talk to him. If you want to, that is.
I'm afraid, but I'll have to think about it.
And that was the beginning of it?
In 3 weeks, he was out and about, working for Enzo Gazzoli. At night, he went back to Nina's house, and they were lovers.
And beyond the fact that he was English, you still have no idea who he was?
No,
A deserter then?
it seemed the most likely category. But a deserter was afraid, has the fugitive look. Nerone had none of that. Once he was well, he walked and talked and laughed like a free man.
Was he an officer?
I thought so. He was a cultivated man. He had a habit of decision.
What was his relations with Nina Santuzzi?
They were happy together. The rest, you'll have to talk to Nina.
I'm sorry to press you like this, Doctor, but you understand what I'm commissioned to do.
I understand. I'm trying to keep my evidence firsthand.
Go on.
The next stage begins in the middle of autumn. Neroni called me to examine Nina. She was 2 months pregnant.
What was his reaction to that?
He was glad of it. They both were.
Yet he made no move to marry Nina?
No. I put it to them both, but
What did he say?
nothing. It was Nina that answered.
Time enough for wedding bells, Dottore, when we know what is going to happen.
I remember the next part very well. Just when it seemed I had measured Neroni for what he was, a fly-by-night who could be on his way before the dawn showed, he surprised me again.
Ah,
He said, apropos of nothing at all, it's going to be a bad winter, Doctor. You and I had better start preparing for it now.
You and I are the only people around here with any brains or any influence. We'll have to run the organization.
You're mad. You don't understand these people. The family is the only thing that counts. The rest can rot in a ditch. You can't do it.
I've already started. I've gotten families to agree to put a quarter of their food stocks into a common store for the winter. Of course, I'll have to pay a price for it.
What sort of price?
I don't know yet, but I think it will come very high in the end.
and you succeeded.
Yes. Before the snow came, everybody in Gemello Minori had agreed. And we had 10 tons of supplies sealed up in the Grotta del Famo.
Grotta del Famo. That's where they buried him, wasn't it?
That's where they buried him. In May, we heard the news that Rome had fallen to the Allies, and early in June, Paolo was born, and he was born blind. Then she screamed like an animal and buried her face in the pillow. The boy is born blind, was all she could think or say. I left before midnight, safe at last from the threat of the concentration camp, when Giacomo took me to the door.
You're a friend of mine, Meyer, and I understand, even if I don't agree. But keep Lupo away from the village. Keep him away from me.
This is history, man. You can't stop it. Someone's got to start organizing. Then he went back to me.
You can't be alone tonight, Carol. I'll stay with you. I want to tell you something, Nina Mia.
Tell me.
We will name the boy Paolo,
He's your son, Giacomo. You must name him, but why Paolo?
because Paolo, the apostle, was a stranger to God, and like me, found him on the road to Damascus. Because like this boy, Paolo was blinded but saw again, through the mercy of God.
But the doctor said...
I'm telling you, the boy will see. The cataracts will disappear in 3 weeks. I promise you in the name of God.
How do you know? How can you be sure?
When it happens, Nina, let it appear like news to you too. Tell nobody about this morning. Will you promise me?
3 weeks later, to the day and the hour, when she took the child from his cradle, he opened his eyes. They were clear and shining like his father's. And when she held him to the light, he blinked. The wonder of the moment was like a revelation. She wanted to shout and sing and go calling down the village street. But Giacomo was already dead and buried. You have made a good lawyer, Monsignor. What's your next question?
Who was Il Lupo?
Who told you that?
Nina. She heard you and Nerone talking at the door. You said, "This is history. You can't stop it." I thought you could tell me what that meant.
I joined the partisans. I was there the day Giacomo Nerone was brought into Il Lupo's tent.
So, you're Nerone. I heard a great deal about you. I'd like to talk with you.
Could we leave it? My wife's in labor. I'd like the doctor to see her as soon as possible.
Relax, Giacomo. Nina's as strong as an ox. We'll make up the time on the downhill.
Very well.
Myers told me of the work you've done in Gemelli, the confidence that you've built up with the people. That's excellent, as a temporary measure.
Why temporary?
Because when the war ends, as it soon must, this country will need a strong and united government to organize and run it.
That means a communist government?
Yes, we're the only people who have to have a clear platform and the strength to carry it into practice.
You need a charter too, don't you? A mandate?
We have it now. How does any party win confidence? By showing results, by establishing order out of chaos, by getting rid of dissenting elements and building on strength.
That's what the Fascidi tried to do.
Their mistake was to build a dictatorship of one man. Ours would be a dictatorship of the proletariat. You've done a good job, but where's it led you? Where's the future in that?
There's no future at all, I know that. We understand each other, I think.
We have the guns and the training to use them. We cut you out in an afternoon. What's the profit in that?
None. So I'll pass the word around to the people to wait it out without violence until the first free elections.
By that time, they'll have forgotten the guns. They'll remember only the bread and the pasta and the bars of American chocolate.
And the boys you shot in the ditches, the old men beaten, the girls with shaven heads.
No room for the two of us in Gemelli, Norani. If you stay, I'll have to kill you.
I know. I don't want to die a martyr, but I stand on land that I tilled with my own hands, in a place where I found love and hope and belief. I refuse to be hunted out of it to give you a cheap victory.
Very well. We know where we stand.
It's a personal question, Doctor. Did you actually join the Communist Party?
I never held a party ticket. After Nerone left, the Lupo said almost kindly,
I'll release your service after the execution, Meyer. If you take my advice, you'll cut loose and go away for a while. You're not made for this sort of thing.
I know. I don't believe enough either way.
And the rest of it?
At 8 o'clock in the morning, they arrested Nerone in Nina's house. When they came to my house, they pushed him roughly inside and shut the door. 2 guards stood between Nerone and the door, and between him and the table, there was a clear space with a single chair. Lupo was smiling, clear-eyed and polite as a host at a dinner party.
I'm sorry we had to be rough with you, Nerone. You shouldn't have resisted arrest. You have a right, of course, to know the charges against you. Giacomo Nerone, you're charged before this military court with desertion from the British Army and active collaboration with German units operating in the area of Gemelli Minore. Before you're brought on trial on these charges, you are at liberty to say anything you wish.
On the charge of desertion, this court has no jurisdiction. Only a British Army court-martial can try me for that.
We will note your objection. You will, however, be brought to trial on the second charge.
I challenge your jurisdiction on that as well. This is not a proper court. Its officials hold no legal commission.
I disagree with you. Partisan groups or guerrillas operating in support of the Allies. Their authority deserves ultimately from the Allied High Command.
In that case, I have nothing to say.
You're foolish to stay, you know.
It's done, why discuss it?
You interest me, that's why. But I can't see you in the role of a martyr.
You cast me for it.
And you accepted it. Why?
I like the lines. The last one of all. Consummatum est.
You. And the work.
The work isn't important. It will probably do it better yourself. The work dies. If it lasts, if it develops, it's not because of the man who began it, because other men think and feel and believe the same way. Your own party's an example of it. You'll die too, you know. What then?
Work will go on. Work will go on. The old systems will perish in their own corruption, and people will come into it on their own. It will happen, Neroni. I may not be there to see it, but I'm not important.
You say you're not important. I say that I am. The blind, the futile, the fumbling, the failed. I was, I am, I shall be.
You'll die for it. His monstrous father.
I know, and it's gone on for 2,000 years. I wonder whether yours will last so long.
The rest was quite simple. He was tried and found guilty. They took him up the hill, the old olive tree, tied him to it, and shot him. Everyone was there, even the children.
And Nina?
She went up to him, kissed him, and then stood back. Even when they shot her, she didn't say a word. When the others left, she stayed there. She was still there when the burial party came that night to take him away.
Who buried him?
Anselmo, the Contessa, 2 men from the villa, Nina, and myself.
I don't understand.
Simple enough. All 3 of us wanted to hate him. But in the end, he shamed us into loving him.
And yet, when I came here, you were all afraid of him.
I know. Love is the most terrible thing in the world.
Blaze Meredith laid down on the bed, leaned back on the pillows, and closed his eyes. He knew now with certainty that he had come to the end of his search. He began to pray, but before the prayer was finished, the old sickness took him, gripping and wrenching, so that when he cried out in the agony of it, till the blood welled up hot and choking in his throat. A long time later, weak and dizzy, he dragged himself to the writing desk and in a shaky hand began to write.
My Lord Bishop, I am very ill, and I believe I may die before I have time to record the results of my investigation. First, let me tell you what I have found. I believe most firmly, on the evidence of those who knew him, that Giacomo Nerone was a man of God, who died in the faith and in the attitude of martyrdom. What the court will decide is another matter, a legality, and irrelevant, it seems to me, to the fundamental facts that the finger of God is here, and that the leaven of goodness in this man is still working in the lives of his people. Second, will you permit me to be buried in Gemelli Minore? I had once asked to be buried in His Eminence's church, but Rome is very far. And here, for the first time, I have found myself as a man and as a priest. It's very late, my lord, and I am tired. I can write no more. Forgive me, and in your charity, pray for me.
Now, the thing he had feared most of all was come to pass. He was trying to explain himself, but there was only a mist and silence, and out of the silence the echo of his own voice. The mist cleared slowly, and the voice came nearer. Then he saw, bending over him, the face of Aurelio, Bishop of Valenta. He stretched out one emaciated hand, and the bishop held it between his own.
I am dying, my lord.
As a man should, my son, with dignity and among friends.
He looked beyond the bishop and saw them grouped at the foot of the bed. Anne de Sanctis, Aldo Minor, Nina Sangiucci, old Anselmo in his stained cassock with the sacramental stole around his neck.
Will your lordship confess me, please? I am very tired.
Aurelio, the bishop, took the grubby stole from the neck of Father Anselmo and laid it on his own shoulders. And when the others had gone from the room, he bent forward to hear the last tally of the last sins of Monsignor Blaise Meredith. When he had received the viaticum, he lay back with his eyes closed and folded hands, with the room filled slowly with the murmur of the old prayers of the departing spirit. A long time after they were finished, Meredith opened his eyes and said, quite clearly,
I was afraid so long. Now it's so very easy.
a faint rigor shook him, and his head lulled slackly on the white pillow.
He's dead.
He is with God.